Starting off this countdown, we have Eastern State Penitentiary. Built in 1829, Eastern State Penitentiary was known for housing some of the biggest criminals, such as Al Capone. The conditions in this prison weren't the best. Prisoners were kept in complete solitude, seeing nobody else besides the guards. Whenever they would leave their cell, guards would cover their heads so that they couldn't see anyone else and no one could see them. That alone would drive them insane. But they didn't stop there. The guards would often torture the inmates by soaking them in cold water and then letting them dry outside during the winter time. The prison closed in 1971, and now apparently the ghost of the prisoners haunt the walls, seeking revenge on the guards.
At number 9, Missouri State Penitentiary, aka The Walls. So this prison was built in the early 1930s, and the initial prison population was under 20 people. Obviously, it grew to numbers much greater than that until its closure in 2004, and it saw quite a few infamous prisoners. They include Charles Pretty Boy Floyd and James Earl Ray. So during the time the prison was operational, 40 inmates were executed within its gas chambers. Also, in 1954, there was a major riot at the prison. Police and patrols from all around Missouri had to go to try to stop the riot and lessen the disturbance. The riot led to the death of 4 inmates, the injury of 29 inmates and 4 guards, and several buildings being seriously burned. Times magazine once called it the bloodiest 47 acres in America for all the violence that happened at the penitentiary. Also, it's no surprise that ever since it's been closed, it's been a hotspot for eerie encounters and sightings. Visitors have said they've encountered lingering spirits, either seeing them or hearing them. That can range from footsteps throughout the halls or seeing what they think is a former inmate and then it disappearing. At number 8, Old Idaho Penitentiary. The Old Idaho Penitentiary housed prisoners from 1872 to 1973. The conditions of the prison were abysmal, especially as time went on, since infrastructure didn't keep up with the times. This led to the riots that eventually led to prisoners of Old Idaho to be moved to a more modern prison in 1973. Over the 100 years of the prison, 110 inmates died from old age, illness, and murder, and 10 state executions took place there. In recent years, many people who visit Old Idaho see or hear things they can't explain, sometimes even things caught on camera. These reports of experiences include people hearing voices, feeling like they were physically touched, or feeling a sense of heaviness or strange feeling. The website for the penitentiary says these occurrences are more frequent in Siberia, which is the solitary confinement cells, and the gallows room in the maximum security cell house. At number 7, Maxwell Street Police Station. So this police station was built in 1889 and became a notorious police station known for corruption, bribery, brutality, and torture. In part, this may have been because the likes of the Jenna brothers were from the area, and that was a pair that partnered with Al Capone's operation to make prohibited liquor within blocks of the police station. Allegedly, many criminals were sent down to the basement and they didn't make it out alive. While it's now used as a part of the set for the TV show Chicago PD, there are stories that souls still linger there. Screams of the people tortured or killed in the dungeon have been reported to echo from the basement, and people have also heard crying, moaning, and the sounds of rattling bars and handcuffs. At number 6, we have Central Unit Prison. So Central Unit Prison opened in 1909 and was closed down in 2011. One of its famous inmates was musician Leadbelly. So an unfortunate aspect of the prison was the inflated numbers of African Americans it imprisoned under the discriminatory black codes. They did this in order to supply labor for the state's convict lease system, where you could lease a convict to do labor for you. Unsurprisingly, this has been called slavery by another name. Since its closing, only one group was able to explore the abandoned prison, and it was Ghost Adventures. They documented blasts of cold air, spikes of electrical charges on an EMF, and one member felt a heaviness on his chest. This led to that member feeling lightheaded, kind of floaty, and overall weird, so he had to take a break. Lastly, they caught a shadow figure on a camera that they couldn't outright explain. Even if there were more ghosts there that no one saw, it has been closed to the public since, and the zone people have been trying to figure out what to do with the land. So who knows just how many ghosts or paranormal things are there. But let's move on to number 5, Lake County Jail. So this jail was built in 1908 in Crown Point, Indiana. During its early years, county sheriffs were required to live at the jail. Because of this, it was a combined residence with the family's living area, warden's residence, department offices, 150 cells, maximum security accommodations, an institutional kitchen, food storage, heating and cooling systems, a barber shop, and a garage. Did you keep track of how many things? It was basically its own little town. In 1934, the gangster John Dillinger escaped the prison, which has since made the jail somewhat infamous. It closed down in the 70s and was turned into a historic site. Over the past 2 decades, there have been restorations on the site, and there have been stories about hauntings taking place there. In the cells and hallways of the jail, strange photographs have been taken. doors open and close by themselves, and lights turn on and off. Some have even heard disembodied footsteps and voices, and both volunteers at the historic site and visitors have had these experiences. Let's move on to number 4, Ohio Penitentiary. This penitentiary was opened in 1834 and closed down in 1979. Back in the early 1900s, it was condemned by reformers due to stories coming out of it. From cholera outbreaks to murders and executions, it was full of death. But fire was the biggest bane. In April of 1930, a huge blaze swept through the west block of the prison, taking the lives of 322 inmates in a single night. Even while the prison was still open, inmates would complain about seeing apparitions or ghostly figures. After the penitentiary was torn down, rumors of those same sightings around the ruins was quick to spread. In its place now is a sport arena, which is still rumored to be haunted. Number 3, Fort Delaware. Fort Delaware was built in 1859 as a prison camp for Confederate prisoners of war during the Civil War. It was mainly known for its role as a prison, with nearly 13,000 prisoners kept within the wooden barracks. The living conditions were horrifying, as food rations were small and nearly inedible. Plus, the water was putrefied. Scurvy, smallpox, and severe malnutrition were common. The prisoners were so famished that sergeants would throw rats into the crowds. They would laugh as they watched the imprisoned men struggle for a piece of the meat. Around 2,700 men died within those walls, and many of their spirits are said to linger within the haunted walls. Its dark history made it a popular spot for paranormal enthusiasts, and the dungeons where prisoners were held is said to be a particularly active spot. Number 2, Alcatraz. Alcatraz goes down in history as the ultimate American prison. It initially started out as a military prison, but it was reopened in 1933 to be an escape-proof federal prison for the worst of all the lawbreakers. It was known for housing Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and Doc Barker, among others. Due to the limited privileges and the confinement of the inmates, murder, suicide, and insanity became frequent. There were bloody and violent breakout attempts, and one was proven successful. 3 bank robbers vanished into the bay, never to be found again. It was closed 1 year after that successful escape in 1963. Today, it is operated by the National Park Service, who have had some of their staff members report ghosts or other paranormal happenings on the property. Things like strange sounds, screams, yells, weeping, and eerie music. Lastly, at number 1, Eastern State Penitentiary. The Quakers founded Eastern State Penitentiary in 1829 as a prison of total isolation. It was once the most famous and expensive prisons in the world, mainly because of the unbearably strict rules about inmate communication. The only people the inmates were allowed to communicate with were the wardens and guards. This was set in place as a way to attempt to reform the individuals, but the solitary confinement led many to being driven insane by the solitude. To break the rules was to guarantee an extreme punishment, which drove to suicides being common. At the prison, solitary confinement ended in the 1870s, and the prison closed down a century later. Ever since it's been closed, paranormal encounters have been common there. People talk of ghost stories such as apparitions, mysterious footsteps, and other strange sounds. With all that happened there, it's believable.
Number 10, Moundsville Penitentiary, West Virginia. Oh, take me home, country roads to the place I belong, West Virginia. Okay, that's enough of that. I think me singing will haunt your dreams more than any of the places on this list. Well, first we have the Moundsville Penitentiary. This place opened in 1879 and quickly became one of the most violent prisons in America. That's basically being the heavyweight champion of violent prisons. In the time that this prison was open, there was 36 homicides and a bunch of executions, so you better believe that this place is packed full of ghosts that walk the halls. One of the most famous ghosts wasn't even an inmate. People say they've seen the ghost of a maintenance man who used to work there. He was brutally beaten to death by the inmates because he would inform the guards when the inmates were misbehaving. Snitches? Get stitches, baby. The game is the game. The Moundsville Penitentiary is known as the most haunted place on Earth. So the moral of the story goes, don't snitch, or you're gonna end up a ghost around a bunch of the people that you snitched on.
In our 9th spot, we have Atlanta Prison Farm. The Atlanta Prison Farm, also known as the Honor Farm, first opened its doors in around 1918. The plan for this prison was for criminals to work off their sentences by doing labor work. This was only for the prisoners that were deemed trustworthy enough. In fact, they really believed that this would be a solid plan, so there were hardly any security. However, it didn't turn out to be such a good idea. There were a lot of gangs at this prison, which resulted in a lot of prisoners getting hung and killed. The prison closed its doors in 1995. But in October of 2009, a fire burnt a large section of the prison. Firefighters didn't even care at all. They didn't try to even attempt to extinguish the fire. Now what remains of the prison is badly vandalized, and pictures of the inside show that it's not the safest place to visit. In our 8th spot we have HM Pentridge Prison. Her Majesty's Prison Pentridge, or HM Prison Pentridge, was an Australian prison established in 1851. Now the problem with this prison was that it was meant to hold 650 prisoners and only 100 guards. But soon the prison became overcrowded with thousands of prisoners. In fact, a large percentage of the prison population died inside the prison. This was due to monthly stabbings, bludgeonings, and bashings. The prison closed on May 1st, 1997 due to a bunch of riots and scandals. But because so many people died there, they actually had to bury them on the prison's ground. Over the years, bones of the prisoners have been found in and around the prison. So I suggest not going there unless you want to stumble upon some human remains. Coming in at number 7 we have Moundsville Prison. Moundsville, West Virginia Penitentiary was built in 1876, and it looks a lot like a medieval fortress. But this prison wasn't designed to hold a lot of inmates. They each were meant to have their own 5-foot by 7-foot cell. That's extremely small. But eventually overcrowding became an issue, and up to 3 inmates were placed in one cell. 2 were on super small bunk beds, while the other slept on a mattress on the floor by the toilet. The conditions weren't the best, that's for sure. Before the prison was abandoned in 1995, a lot of death sentences were carried out there. 85 men were hung and 9 were electrocuted. This prison saw the worst of the worst criminals. One of the more notable inmates was Harry Powers, the Lonely Hearts Killer. He would use newspaper ads to lure lonely women to him, with ads saying that he was looking for love and marriage, but instead he would rob and kill them. Now, Tom Stiles, the caretaker of the penitentiary, said that multiple inmates would complain about the prison being haunted. So even before criminals were killed there, the prison was already haunted by other spirits. Now it's even more haunted with the ghosts of the criminals as well. Making our way down the list at number 6 we have Old Essex County Jail. Located in New Jersey, this jail was built in 1937 and has a very creepy Victorian style to it. Over the time, the prison expanded and had its own cafeteria, hospital, auditorium, and gallows in the yard to hang the murderers. The prison closed in 1970 and now is deemed very unsafe to trespassers. Some of the floors are at risk for caving in at any second. Plus, the walls are now covered in creepy vandalism and graffiti. And inmates' files are now scattered all over the floor of the auditorium, along with empty tear gas containers and shotgun shells. So what really went on in that prison? We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Wyoming Territorial Prison. Built in 1872, this prison is one of the oldest buildings in Wyoming. From 1872 to 1890 it was a federal penitentiary, and from 1890 to 1901 it was a state prison. But this prison faced a lot of issues. The first one being that there were a lot of jailbreaks. Within the first 2 years of operation, out of the 44 prisoners there, 11 of them managed to escape. Then over the course of the next couple of years, they struggled with overcrowding. They also had to deal with a number of ghost fires. Yeah, fires would start out of nowhere in the prison. Over the years, the prison was used less and less, and actually was under capacity. At one point, they only had 3 prisoners. Now, the prison was famous for housing the murderer Julius Greenwald, who is said to haunt the area. In fact, he was known for being really good at rolling cigars. And if you visit the prison today, the faint smell of his cigar smoke will follow you around. Moving on at number 4, we have the Garcia Moreno Prison. Located in Ecuador, this abandoned prison is nightmare fuel. Inside of the prison, there are a bunch of haunting images that the inmates left behind. So to pass time, they would make murals or sketches on the walls. Most of them are pretty dark and gruesome, showcasing their misery from being locked up. So originally this prison was built to only hold 300 inmates, but it reached 8 times its capacity, squeezing inmates inside. They weren't living in the best conditions, and by taking a tour of the area, you can see it for yourself firsthand, if you dare. I don't recommend it. In our third spot we have Alcatraz. Of course, this is probably one of the most famous prisons in the world. Alcatraz was a maximum security federal prison built from 1910 to 1912. It first served as a prison for military prisoners, but over the years, it was known to be home of the biggest and baddest criminals. It was also known as being an inescapable prison, but the prison closed in 1963 since it was getting too costly to run. Now it's rumored to be very haunted. Apparently, prisoners were often tortured there by guards with chains, knives, and tasers. Lots of prisoners actually died while locked up there. Legend goes that if you visit the prison, you will be able to hear the sounds of endless weeping and screams. Others have reported hearing music coming from one of the cells, and even got locked in a cell by a trickster ghost. So yeah, definitely do not recommend you visit this prison unless you want to end up behind bars. Literally. Coming in at number 2 we have Port Arthur Prison. Built in 1833, Port Arthur Prison was referred to as Australia's Alcatraz. It was deemed inescapable, and it was known to house only the biggest and baddest criminals. From 1833 to 1853, Port Arthur was a place for convicted British criminals. Rumor has it that these prisoners were psychologically tortured there. It operated under the principle of isolation, silence, and control. As a result, a lot of prisoners were driven mad in solitary confinement. The prison was shut down in 1877, and then in 1895 and 1897, devastating fires destroyed some of the prison. Here's the thing, the prison and the entire land is said to be cursed. In 1997, a man named Martin Bryant killed 35 people and wounded 23 more on the land. This massacre is considered the worst massacre in the modern history of Australia. As a result, the prison and the surrounding area is pretty much abandoned. And in our number 1 spot we have Holmesburg Prison. The Holmesburg Prison opened in 1896 and was nicknamed the Terror Dome, and you'll understand why shortly. Tons of very horrific incidents occurred at this prison. From 1938, half of the prisoners went on a hunger strike because of complaints about the food. As punishment, the leaders of the strike were taken to a building that had several cells lined with radiators and steam pipes. The windows and air ducts were closed off, and they raised the temperatures in the building to nearly 200 degrees. This happened during an August heat wave. As a result, several of the prisoners died from being boiled alive. Others suffered from horrific burns. But that's not all. One of the prison doctors would conduct unethical experiments on the prisoners, exposing them to herpes, radiation, psychoactive drugs, and more. Then in 1970, a riot took place in the prison. The inmates were armed with meat cleavers, knives, and makeshift pitchforks. They then went around trashing the dining hall and killing each other. Then in 1973, the prison's warden and the deputy were stabbed to death by the inmates. Finally, the prison closed in 1995, and due to its horrific past, no one wants to visit there.
At number 10, we have Ohio State Reformatory, aka Mansfield Reformatory. Yes, this is the reformatory that was made famous in the film The Shawshank Redemption. It was opened up in 1896 as a place for prisoners that were too old for juvie, but not hardened enough for the penitentiary in the state. So at one point, it was applauded as a place that could humanely reform first-time offenders. But its conditions deteriorated to the point that it became known for abuse, torture, and murder. The inmates even filed a lawsuit against it, saying it was unfit for human occupation. But even after that, it stayed open until 1986. Ever since it closed, there have been stories of the paranormal occurring there. Mainly, apparitions and footsteps of the former inhabitants have been encountered. Some people have even said they have had unsettling encounters in the cells where many of the inmates suffered and some died. A resident ghost of the prison is said to be the late wife of one of the wardens. She died in 1950 in an apartment in the administration wing of the prison. She died when a loaded handgun fell from a closet shelf and went off. Her spirit has remained in the apartment ever since, and it typically manifests in the smell of perfume.
Number 9. Bodmin Jail. Now we're gonna shoot over to Cornwall, England and check out the Bodmin Jail. I would have hated to go to jail back in the day. I'm sure it would have been easier to break out, but the conditions conditions would have been horrible. At least they have Purell now. The Bodmin Jail is one of those old school hellholes. It was built back in 1779 and managed to stay open for 100 years. Now it stands as a major hotspot for paranormal activity. They got it all at the Bodmin Jail. Weird voices, footsteps, loud bangs, soft touches on your bum before a wet kiss. You know, all the stuff that ghosts do all the time. The most famous ghost that hangs within the walls is the spirit of Selena Wade. She got locked up for drowning her kids, so it's safe to say she's terrifying. It's said that whenever mothers come to visit the jail, it's said that she'll harass them, trying to get the visiting mothers to forgive her for the crimes that she committed. So don't drown your kids. Number 8. Cripple Creek Jail. When the population of a town starts to skyrocket, a few things will always happen. Rent goes up, and then you have to move into a place with 67 roommates. Jobs disappear, so you better behave yourself at work unless you want to start selling off your respect for money. And of course, local anemones are usually not equipped to deal with anything. That's what happened in Cripple Creek in the late 1800s when the gold rush hit. People's lust for striking rich overnight shot this town up from 1,500 to 50,000 people in a very short period of time. This of course made the crime shoot through the roof and then forced a small town to try and find ways to manage all the prisoners. This led to many deaths at the Cripple Creek Jail, both on the sides of inmates and guards. It's actually said that one of the most famous ghosts hanging around the jail today is that of a female guard. People say she stayed behind to keep the other ghosts in prison. Give this girl a raise! She has allegiance even in death, baby! Number 7. Eastern State Penitentiary. This penitentiary in Philadelphia was open for 42 years and had the reputation for being one of the most brutal prisons of all time. Inmates were treated worse than cattle. They would be kept in near total isolation for 23 hours a day. The rooms that they were kept in had 0 windows. That means no sunlight is getting through. You gotta get that vitamin D. Staying away from the sun for a long time is really bad for your health. Well, I mean, so is going to jail, but whatever. Guards would also torture inmates in brutal ways. One thing they would do is take inmates who had misbehaved and put them in a place called the hole. This was a dark pit in the ground with 0 light and hardly any room to move. While in the hole, they would be given just enough food and water to survive, and after their time was up, the guards would pull out their nearly lifeless bodies and throw them back into a secluded cell. Many inmates went mad or died from the isolation, and ghosts have been spotted all over the prison, especially in the rooms where these tortures would take place. Number 6. Ararat County Jail. Now we're going down under to Australia. A country built by criminals must have had some of the worst prisons of all time. Imagine being such a monster that you get locked up when you're living around criminals. You would have to be a baby eater dog kicker or something terrible like that. Well, the Ararat County Jail was a place where you would send these kinds of people. What made this place especially terrible is that it was a prison for the criminally insane. So there were all sorts of treatments performed on patients. And by treatments, I mean lobotomies without anesthesia, along with shock treatment, and an array of other horrible things that no human should have to endure. It's said that you can hear the screams of people who were tortured there to this day. One of the most famous ghosts that lurk the halls is that of Nurse Carrie, a nurse who defends her ward and tries to stop people from coming in. She still doesn't want the public to know about the terrible things they would do to patients. Well, the word's out, Carrie. Everyone knows you're a turd. Number 5. The London Tower. This is probably the most famous one on the list. The London Tower is over 900 years old and is a major hotspot for tourists. If you're a ghost, this is the place to haunt. You get to scare thousands of people every year and probably photobomb everybody. Imagine being the ghost that everyone talks about at the London Tower. How glamorous. It was originally made as a safe haven for the royal family, but got converted into a prison not long after that. Everything went down from there. Prisoners would be tortured, tried, and executed all in the big brick building. So you can imagine there's some major bad mojo floating around. The tower is constantly guarded by the royal guard, and when new guards are stationed there, many of them have reported a crushing sensation in their chest. I'm guessing the ghosts want to see if you're a punk weenie before they let you work there. The most famous ghost is probably that of Queen Anne Boleyn, one of the wives of Henry VIII. She was beheaded in the London Tower. Very fancy. Number 4. Ohio State Reformatory. For those of you who are movie buffs, you are really going to like this one because this is where they filmed Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, one of the greatest movies of all time. And if you like hostile encounters with ghosts like being shoved or yelled at, then this is the place for you. You have no excuse not to check it out. The place was built in Mansfield, Ohio between the years of of 1886 and 1910. This place was a hoot and a holler when it went up, and quickly got the reputation for having some of the worst conditions of any prison. Jolly gee, sign me up, mister. In fact, in 1910 the prison was shut down because the conditions were inhumane. My god, it sounds like a great vacation spot. Now they just keep it open for ghost tours. If you decide to go there, you should prepare yourself for everything from phones malfunctioning to cold spots to straight up being pushed. You know what they say about these Ohio State ghosts? They are great hosts. Number 3, Alcatraz. If you live in North America, then this is probably the most famous prison to you. I mean, it's one of the most legendary places in the world. Some of the worst criminals ever spent time in there. By spent time in there, you know I mean forced to stay there because of their horrible crimes. Al Capone being one of the most famous criminals who was caged at the Rock. This place was so rough that murders, attacks, and suicides were commonplace. A murder going down to Alcatraz was like someone who leaves negative YouTube comments having a girlfriend pillow. It's extremely common. Even before the prison was built, the Native Americans would use the island as a place to exile people, and they believed dark spirits lived on the island. There was even a case of an inmate saying he could see glowing red eyes in his cell and started screaming. In the morning, he was found dead with strangle marks on his neck. Number 2, Karosta Naval Port Prison. Let's run over to the Soviet prison that was opened in the year 1900. I wouldn't want to get thrown in a Russian prison now, man. Imagine back then. They probably didn't even have blankets. You probably kept yourself warm through mental toughness. This place was built in Latvia and used as a detention center for the Russian military who broke some war laws. I don't know what war laws are, but you can leave them in the comments. It's stated on the record that no one ever escaped this jail, but it was built in the middle of nowhere. So if you ever did escape this jail, you would probably just freeze to death or be eaten by a bear. Now you can go there to do something they call Extreme Night, where they let you spend the night in the jail. A place that is haunted by dead war criminals? That's a hard pass for me. And number 1 on the list, the Shepton Mallet Prison. We're gonna top off this list with the Shepton Mallet Prison in Somerset, England. Until the year 2013, this prison was the oldest operating prison in the world. It was built in the year 1625. I didn't even know that was legal. If I was there, I would keep asking the question, is this up to code? Even though I knew the answer was no. That would be like my little dad joke. I would tell everyone until someone shut me up by stabbing me in the liver. This place is so old that there are even unmarked graves around the prison from prisoners who died from smallpox. Goddamn, smallpox got you while you were in prison? That's a huge bummer. The prison is famous for housing some of the most dangerous prisoners in all of England and is also super haunted. There was even an attack where a guard was assaulted by an invisible assailant and got burned.